Okay, here we are, week 5 already. It seems only a few days since we actually started, doesn't it? It's week 5. And what we're looking at in terms of sustainable information corporate governance this week is the concept of frameworks. Frameworks are essentially sets of very, very interesting and useful questions that you can use to ask yourself, do I really understand the current situation and what should I be doing? And what we're going to look at is the British Standard 7799, or more modernly known as ISO 27000 series, 27000 naught through about 27011. And it's called the Information Security Standards, although, as I said before, 27K is really all about information governance, much, much more than just security. And we're also going to look at a British government standard that was created by the government initially, called ITIL, and some of you may have come across ITIL before now, probably in IT services management at least, and perhaps elsewhere. And what I want to do today is very briefly and very rapidly have a look at what the differences are and how we can bring the two of them together. So what you're going to need over the next week or two, and in fact really for the rest of the semester as you write the article for the module, you're going to need ISO standard 27002, and you can either use the old version of 2005 or better still the new version published last year in 2013. You'll need to want to find some of the guidelines for ITIL, and you also need to be finding some of the Office of Government Computing, the OGC guidelines. And the final thing that you'll find really useful is this COBIT related document, aligning COBIT ITIL, and it was originally called ISO 17799, which is one of the names that is still around for what we're calling ISO 27K. And I've drawn much of the material in this series of slides from this document. Now, you have to be a little bit careful because the people who actually wrote this book, or yes, it's nearly a book, were very much proponents of COBIT. And they kind of have a perspective that COBIT is better than any other framework for information governance and IT governance and so on. I think it's debatable. I think that ISO 27002 tends to incorporate all of this, actually, if you think about it very carefully. There are 3 organisations around which are quite important, these ones. You might want to find out a bit about them to find their credibility, why they're important, why they've done so much work in the field, and now how much we should actually pay attention to what they say. This is the details about ITGI, IT Governance Institute. You can read this later on. The Office of Government Commerce, OGC, well, it kind of provides some of the guidelines for the British public sector and how to become efficient in doing all their programs of activity, how to do project management, how to be effective in the procurement. That is, putting out to bid, working out which of the suppliers is worthwhile bothering with and which will give the best value for money, and hopefully then getting them signed up to deliver. And the interesting point, of course, is that although this OGC has been around for quite a long time, very little has changed in terms of effectiveness, success rates of all of the IT related projects for British government. Kind of interesting that we still can't do it right. And then ITIL is an approach to try to get best practices into the service management, IT service management, which is stuff you did last year in IT services management. And then we're looking at the ISO standard and comparing, contrasting those two to see what they're really about. So, service management, information security management, but also information governance, which is a whole thing, not just the service, not just the technology, but the people, and the whole project management process from end to end. So, one of the things we'll do once we finish this quick whip through the topic area, there'll be a short discussion period about the idea of best practices. Why do we need best practice? What do we define as best practice? Is it even feasible to have this thing called best practice, or is it actually unachievable? So we'll do that in a few minutes. Now, a couple of slides which might help the discussion when we come back to it. According to that COBIT, ITIL, and 27K book, they make the point that IT is actually critical to almost all businesses these days, and it's become more so year by year since they actually wrote the original version. The idea of best practice is that they help us to govern what we're doing in the governance sense. We need to provide checklists to people to help them remember what it is they should be doing, be able to make sensible choices, and sometimes good frameworks help us with, because we're helping people to become more expert in what they're doing, we don't need quite so many experts around because you can read the procedure, that's what they claim. Maybe there's some fewer errors, more trust from business partners. That was why ISO 27000 was first started in the UK as BS 7799 back in the late 90s, to get the trust. If we can prove that we do the process, the system right, then you are going to trust us as your supplier or as your business partner, as your customer. Nice theory. Is the reality, does the reality match up? Now, what is interesting, and whether we call it best practice or good practice, I really don't mind. I think I prefer good practice because it's more achievable than best practice. But if we do it properly, then we need to build it into the way that the organisation looks at its risk management, its other control frameworks, its audit processes, project management process, the whole way of being. That's what governance is about, the way we do things here in a sense. But we need to make it appropriate for the governance. The things that you can do when you are a 10,000 strong organisation in terms of employees is quite different to what you can do when you have only 5 or 10 or 15 employees. And really, not only should it be consistent, it should be completely linked in and integrated, so it's not something that, oh, that's computing over there. Because if you think back, if I look back to where I used to work before I came to university here, we had the ordinary procurement organisation that bought the stationery, that bought the metals and so on, and the bits for making jet engines, and then somewhere over there, almost completely isolated much of the time, was the computing procurement organisation. On the grounds that computing and IT was something that nobody really understood, and let's leave it to some specialists. And that led to different cultures, different practices, different everything between the mainstream purchasing and IT purchasing, and that's really a very, very bad thing. You need to have it all properly integrated. And the third thing is, rather than just having these procurement standards which live in a great big tome like that, which is put on the top shelf, out of the way, gathering dust, you need to have it as liveware, not shelfware. So people must understand what to do, how to do it, but most importantly, why to do it. Why it's important to do it this way. Why we've got to do it properly. If you go back to last year, many of you with ITSM, you'll remember the problems with the productivity gap. The fact that we don't get much return from our IT investments. Even those which are comparatively successful in Standish Group terms we're not making a lot of money out of them. Most of them actually end up destroying value, which is kind of bizarre. And if you look at most government IT projects, they've been in the challenge to catastrophe sort of scales from Standish Group. Over the years, we're spending more and more and more and more money on IT, its services, the equipment, the servers. Banks are having to spend perhaps anywhere between 3 and 5 billion over the next 2 or 3 years to do some of the things they've been asked to do by the regulators, to solve some of the problems, to separate out investment banking from all the rest of the banking. Lots and lots and lots of different regulations all over the place about the use of IT and the way it should be configured, the processes that we followed, all of the auditing processes and so on. Many, many, many of them. And we still have to run the business as well. And then another list, the list of business drivers for getting the IT right are really growing very fast. And there's a whole set of frameworks. There's what, 3, 6, 9 different frameworks there that we can use that help us, in theory, to do some of the work. Whether it's ITIL, COBIT, the ISO 27K started there, ISO 9000 series in terms of processes and such like, plus lots of semi-private type of, or individualistic types of sets of questions. These all actually are very, very valuable, and the more of these that you get to understand and build together, choose the right bits for your organization, the better the likelihood is, or the greater likelihood is, that you might be slightly more successful. So, very briefly, ITIL. Let's see what ITIL has. It's how we deliver IT services. Things that the business actually needs, rather than, if you go back 30, 40 years, here was a lovely new box from IBM or from ICL or whoever, and let's find out how we can use it. We'll buy one because it'll put us ahead of our competitors, and then we'll have to start thinking, how can we use it? No, that's completely the wrong way around. Let us find what the business needs, and then look for the most appropriate solution, which might or might not include technology. It might, but then it might not. And so ITIL helps us to begin to address those questions and then to deliver it. It provides a whole set of what they claim to be best practices, and it kind of helps to drive the idea of having a quality basis for what you're doing. And this is a list of some of the things that it helps you to understand in terms of service support. Some of you may have worked on a help desk during your placement year. Some of you all know about help desks and such like and what they do. And here it talks about how that should be used and how also you should be thinking about other sorts of incidents. There's sort of incidents like security failures, major problems with viruses, all that sort of stuff. It also makes the point capacity. Have we got enough raw compute capacity? Have we got enough bandwidth capacity? Have we got the right number of people who are experts and so on? Is it available when we need it? CIA from yet last week. How do we actually manage the costings of the services? How do you manage charging back to the actual users, so that they actually understand what they're paying for, what the value is that they are receiving? And very, very importantly, continuity management. And there's a whole set of ISO standards on business continuity management, which are very, very important. As you can see, it covers many aspects in terms of development, the design, operating, maintaining, keeping up to date with what's happening to it, and seeing what's happening in the business. How is the business changing, and do we need to change the way that the IT is provided? Do we need to modify the systems and so on? A lot of things go on in keeping IT running. And one of the points about ITIL is that it's supposed to give, you're supposed to have a complete look. You're not supposed to look at it in individual sections. You're supposed to stand back a bit and think, how does it all fit in as a total process from start to finish, including the IT, yeah, but also the people and everything else that they're doing. Because without the people, the boxes are completely useless. We actually need people to control and manage and guide us, or guide the system. Testing, always problems with testing. We don't really know and never spend enough money on actually testing every aspect. I mean, we talked about iOS 8.0.1, well 8.0, then 8.0.1, then 8.0.2, and 8.2, or 1 or 2, is coming out in a few weeks' time perhaps, which is interesting given that 8.02 took about 5 or 6 hours to download. Has anybody done that on an iPad? It takes something like 5 or 6 hours to download 850 or 885 meg of update. Yeah, and then there's another one coming out very shortly because they didn't test it properly. Risk management analysis there, and thinking about the future. Some of the key principles. Very, very importantly, ITIL focuses on the customer. Who's going to use the beastie? How do the user and customer get involved in the whole process, the whole way of developing, testing, installing, and then in the future operating and running these new systems? Very, very important to think about the performance. Many systems have come in, new systems, which are actually slower and more difficult to use than the way of working before the new system came in, and we see it time after time. The Child Support Agency had a big disaster when they first implemented because it took 3 or 4 times longer to process an applicant's details than the previous machine systems did. Not helpful. Needs to be managed and monitored even during the design and development process. So here's a second discussion point we'll have to come back to. Because ITIL covers both service support and service delivery as 2 sort of streams of thought in the whole standard. And one of the fundamental questions that ITIL helps to bring to the fore is, why do we need to have this stand back and think about the whole broader process? And why do we have to think about the customer, the user? Might be the sponsor, the senior director who's sponsoring the system, or senior manager, but also the people who use it. Why are those so important? And now the second of the frameworks. What is ISO 27000 all about? And particularly ISO 27002. Broadly, its claim is to develop security standards and management practices, and that's what 27001 is all about, the information security management system. But it's then put in parallel with ISO 27002, which is much, much more than security. It's all about information governance, information system governance, and information at the highest level. All that data, all that stuff that we have, there's bits and bytes, all those software packages we develop, that we test, that we put into place, all the hardware. It's a complete picture of every aspect of information governance. It's more than just those security standards. And if we look at what kind of sits at the front of ISO 27002 in section 0.2 in the 2013 version, or section 0.3 in the 2005 version, there are 3 crucial guiding principles. Yeah, legal requirements and generally accepted best practices, but also risk assessment, as we saw just earlier, compliance with all, legal obligations or external obligations, laws, regulations, contracts, and so on. And thirdly, compliance with our own internal process and procedures. You're beginning to get to grips with, the things that are important in relation to those legal requirements. On best practice, we talked about CIA just last week. People need to know who's responsible. The people responsible need to know that the finger points at them and can't be moved. It points out that if we're going to build one of these frameworks inside our organisation for business governance, we need to think about all of these aspects, but we've got to focus right at the beginning on the business objectives, because that's what the organisation exists for, is to meet or to deliver certain objectives, certain results. But all organisations are different, and their organisational cultures are often very different as well. Some are very hierarchical and take orders from the top and just cascade them down and everything works hunky-dory. But others, that won't work at all. But culture is essentially the way we do things here, and that colours and flavours very, very much how we can actually deliver all of this information governance. And again, between very large organisations down to very small, entrepreneurial, very flexible organisations, enormously different ways of doing things and different sorts of risks. It's important to think about the security right from the very beginning. If you try and retrofit security in after you've delivered a system, that's extraordinarily expensive. And one of the problems we have with so much of the sort of business apps, or the various apps which now come out through our tablets and so on, is people design lots of these things without thinking about security on the ground. Let's get it out there, and then we'll sort out the problems later on, and that's very, very difficult. Everybody in the organisation needs to be included, including third-party contractors, and that was what was the problem with the exploit that extracted those 175 million odd sets of ID from Target and many other organisations, is because it didn't include or wasn't made to work with third parties, and so they were able to bring in this exploit software and stuff it onto the system. Training and familiarisation, incredibly important, and by that I don't just mean how to press the buttons. It's the change management education that changes the way that people think and believe and behave is so crucial in that bit. And we need to think about this continuous improvement based on feedback, based on monitoring. And so this is how the structure of 2007-2002-2005 was built up, with themes that actually run all the way through them as well. You'll see again and again security, but here's communications operations management. It doesn't involve necessarily purely security, many other things. Access control is also about things other than pure security. And this bit here is an end-to-end process, and if you think back to the system development life cycle, even if we don't use that much nowadays as an end-to-end waterfall approach, it still has the critical questions about how you launch a project, how you design it, how you build it, how you test it, and get it into production, and then continue to monitor it into the future. And then business continuity management, is the ongoing protection of the whole organisation. It's not just about the hardware or the software, it's about people. And if you look at ISO 25999, I think it is, which is the business continuity management area, it covers much, much more than the IT. It covers people, key people, and things like that. Who are the really important people that the organisation actually depends upon, who need to be thought about? And then finally, yeah, great to have all of these plans. Are we actually doing it? So many organisations have wonderful plans across the whole corporate governance and the IT governance, and they can say, yes, we've got all the processes there, and then they forget about them or ignore them, or either accidentally or very, very deliberately. So, can we use these two, build these two together? And in a sense, people say, yeah, 27002 helps us to define what should be done, the questions to ask to make sure we're actually covering the most important things, and then ITIL kind of looks more at the how we manage those services. Critically, each organisation is different, and we need to build our information governance approach to suit each organisation. So what works for the University of Derby may or may not work for Rolls-Royce across the town. It might or might not work for a government department. It probably won't work for a small 50-strong small business. So we have to be very careful to understand exactly the nature of the organisation. Prioritisation is absolutely crucial, because otherwise you end up in the COVID environment where everything has to be done. Tick, 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 for many, 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 many pages. And what we need to think about in terms of the tailoring, that's the organisational culture and size and risk levels, working out which are the most important things. That's what the assignment is all about. Typically the three most important things that are important in the context. Not every one that you can think of in terms of this location data problem, but what are the really, really important ones? Because that's what we need to focus on first. And then we can sweep up some of the other ones later on. We need to phase our approach using planning based on the prioritisation, based on the tailoring. Try not to be completely theoretical. Be pragmatic. What works, what doesn't work. And link it all back to what the organisation actually vitally needs. And there, that is the main book that you're going to, or main document. Or it's either there or very close to that URL at Ithaca, who are the people who created and now maintain and develop COBIT in its various releases. And if you're careful, you can quite easily get a copy of COBIT as well as this document. This is a freely available comparison document. Whether you go to the link or whether you just use the title as a search, either way you should get to the document. So, what I want you to do, I want you to go back to those discussion areas, go back to the first discussion, spend a few minutes, and then we'll have a little time as a sort of a get-together plenary discussion of where you've got to, and then we'll do a little bit more research, and then we'll come back to it a little bit later on. Okay, guys?